People were running for their lives. Towns were being evacuated. Trainloads of people were going east and west out of Wallace.
One of the worst natural disasters in 20th century American history happened here in Idaho. It was a wildfire called the Big Blowup, or the Big Burn. The fire charred 3 million acres in Washington, North Idaho, and western Montana and killed dozens of people. The year was 1910. We're wrapping up Wildfire Awareness Week with a look back at the Big Burn. As you'll see in this Wake Up Idaho Rewind that first aired in November of 2015, the legacy of the Big Burn stretches into today, a time when our wildfire seasons are getting longer, more intense, and more expensive. 3 million acres of forest laid waste, burned, and blown down. It started on August 20th, 1910, a date in the heart of a long, hot, extremely dry summer. Hurricane-force winds from a cold front whipped hundreds of smaller fires into one massive fire from eastern Washington all the way across northern Idaho and into Montana.
Places where it looks like there's a great big black ball of fire rolling through the country.
One forest ranger trying to fight the monster fire wrote, "Many grown men in the crew were absolutely helpless, and there were several who could only weep or moan, believing they were doomed." Dozens were doomed. The Big Burn killed 85 people, including 78 firefighters, and injured many, many more. Retired forester Darrell Knops oversaw firefighting efforts during his 40-year career and knows the history of 1910.
All they heard was the wind, the tremendous roar, the trees falling all around them. You know, where do you go? What do you do?
The fire swept toward Wallace, Idaho. A third of the town burned down. These historic photos from the University of Idaho's special Big Burn collection show what Wallace looked like after the flames visited. Other towns were destroyed. All that death and destruction in just 2 days.
Wiped communities completely off the map.
In 1910, the Forest Service was only 5 years old. Knopp says the agency's future was iffy because of political battles. The Big Burn was a big reason it survived. Jennifer Jones of the U.S. Forest Service agrees.
I think the 1910 fires, probably the longest lasting impact is that it really led to the professionalization of wildland firefighting.
Jones says there is now a force of 15,000 federal firefighters, plus state and local crews. And the opponent these fighters face isn't backing down.
Our fire seasons are getting longer. They're about 70 days longer on average now than they were in the 1970s, 1980s.
We saw that just this October with the late season Walker fire that burned about 6,000 acres in Boise County. And Jones adds,
we're having more frequent fires, they're getting larger, and they're burning more intensely.
Jones says in an average fire season, just over 6 million acres burn nationwide. This year, that number is 9.3 million so far, just under 800,000 in Idaho alone. And the Forest Service chief predicts the national average will be 12 million acres by the middle of this century.
This year, for the first time with the Forest Service, fire is over 50% of our agency budget.
Jones says this year fighting fires cost the Forest Service $700 million more than Congress allocated for that. That means the agency has had to transfer or borrow that money from other programs in its budget, including prescribed burns and thinning that would lessen the risk of big fires. Senators Mike Crapo of Idaho and Ron Wyden of Oregon have co-sponsored a bill to end so-called fire borrowing and create a disaster fund to pay for the 1% of fires that are catastrophic and the most expensive to fight.
It simply says, let's deal with them as a natural disaster, just like we deal with floods, hurricanes, tidal waves, and the like.
The devastation of the 1910 fires led to the policy of putting out all fires as fast as possible, so fuels built up in the forests for decades. Jones says the thinking started to change in the 70s to let fire play its role in the environment.
When we could, either by igniting prescribed fires or by managing some lightning-caused fires to achieve natural resource management objectives.
And as more and more people live in the mountains and woods, those we talk to believe collaborative efforts are becoming more and more important. The Boise Forest Coalition is a diverse group made up of representatives from the Boise National Forest, timber interests, local governments, citizens, and conservation groups, including the Idaho Conservation League. Among other things, they're looking at the best ways to reduce the risk of wildfire. The ICL advocates targeted thinning around homes, cautious burning, and community planning.
A lot of people want to have their place out in the woods, away from it all, where they can kind of escape and have a little haven. And that's great, but there's also a responsibility that we all have living out there.
We may never see a fire as big as the Big Burn again, but they all believe it will take a concerted effort to keep people and property safe and our forests healthy when future fires spark. And again, this story aired back in November of 2015, and we have a couple big updates since it first aired 6 years ago. First, the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act passed in 2018. It means the Forest Service doesn't have to do that fire borrowing thing anymore and borrow money budgeted for prevention programs such as prescribed burns and thinning. The law provides the funding to fight catastrophic wildfires. Also, similar coalitions like the one in the Boise National Forest now support national forests across the state. You can find all of our Wildfire Awareness Week stories on ktvb.com right now. And Maggie, you know what? Also, the Idaho State Museum has a great exhibit on the 1910 Big Burn fire there at after, since it was newly renovated. It's really kind of an intense one.
So much to learn, so many new people moving into our area who don't know about this.
Right.
So I'm glad you re-aired that.